burial, and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. In Psalm 22, we have these words. For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. So clear are the prophetic words that modern liberals like to say, well, obviously the New Testament writers were just ransacking the Old Testament, making this whole story up. So clear are these prophetic words. Now we as Christians and Muslims, you can't join with the liberals and question the existence of prophecy. Not if you're going to continue to believe that Muhammad is prophesied in the New Testament, can you? You have to accept the reality of prophecy, and it is found right here in regards to the subject of this evening. Hence, we have a unanimous witness to the crucifixion from every relevant source within the first century of the time of Christ's death. Remember, the majority of what Muslims believe about Muhammad has no literary testimony until well after 100 years after his death. So is the Muslim consistent in his application of standards at this point? I just used the term consistent. Who won the game? I'm not sure, but I just used the term consistent. Everyone was expecting me to use that term, so there you go. There's someone out there named Ijaz is very happy right now. Now, the real reason that we're here this evening is because of 40 Arabic words written 600 years after the events of Christ's life. That's why we're here this evening. We're not here because of any of the historical information. We're here because of these words which were read to you in Arabic, and then a very interesting translation used, which maybe we'll get to discuss, was provided in English. Surah 4:157, that they said in boast, we killed Christ Jesus, the Son of Mary, the apostle of Allah, but they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. And those who differ therein are full of doubts with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow, for of a surety they killed him not. This is why we are here this evening, these 40 Arabic words. The next verse says, Nay, Allah raised him up, Rafahu, unto himself, and Allah is exalted in power and wise. So, the problem is that there is no authentic interpretation of this one ayah to be found in the Hadith literature. There are numerous other ayat of the Quran that are interpreted within the Hadith literature. This is not one of them. As a text, it stands alone. It stands without context. In fact, if we were to read other texts in the Quran, such as Surah 355 and 1933, it would naturally be referring to the death of Jesus. We have some questions about the text. What Jewish person would ever call Jesus the Messiah? What does it mean it was made to appear to them? Shabih Allahum. What does that mean? The translation that was used in the reading beforehand said his appearance was put on somebody else. Well, that's a real stretch. That's an interpretive interpretation. It simply means it was made to appear to them. Well, what does that mean? Many Muslims believe he was made to look like someone else. Well, there are many other Muslims that don't see it in that way. Appear to whom? To the Jews? To the Romans? To everybody? It doesn't say. We can't tell. It is not clear. As I said, both Surah 355 and 1933 both speak of Jesus' death, as long as you translate them correctly. Surah 1933 is parallel to Surah 1915. Look at the Arabic there. And the words in Surah 1915 are applied to John the Baptist, who surely died, because if you don't remember, how did John the Baptist die according to the Bible? He was beheaded. I can assure you that is a very effective means of bringing about death. There isn't any question about John the Baptist's death, yet the very same words are used of Jesus. 40 Arabic words written 625 years after the ministry of Jesus, in a different culture, 765 miles from Jerusalem, no first-hand contact, in a completely different language. And what we're being asked is to take all the united testimony of everything from the first century, of all the apostles of Jesus, the original followers of Jesus, the next generation after Jesus, the secular historians. We are supposed to abandon the consistency of the fact that Romans, especially in Judea, had been using crucifixion a great deal at this point in history. All of the historical sources confirm that they were utilizing this as a method of seeking to control the people. And so we have the consistency of who was in control, what was going on at that time. The history is right, the names are right, the dates are right, the times are right, and all the sources say the exact same thing. And yet we have 40 Arabic words from 600 years later, upon which all of that is to be dismissed. You can see why, as Christians, we truly have a problem with that. So the unanimous testimony of the relevant historical sources from the first century after Jesus all testify to his crucifixion in Jerusalem under Pontius Pilate. Both secular and religious sources testify to this fact in numerous ways. Non-historical Gnostic gospels and movements from the 2nd and 3rd centuries deny the crucifixion for purely theological and mystical reasons, as we may need to get into. I'm not sure what Zakher's position is going to be. And as such, those, if we do hear them raised, are utterly irrelevant to any serious, truthful examination of the issue. Jesus and all his apostles not only taught about the crucifixion, the entire message of the Christian faith and of the prophetic witness that testified to him as the Messiah is bound up in this single redemptive act culminating in his resurrection from the dead. And so here's what I want to communicate this evening to all of us. We can have meaningful discussion. I've heard various objections. Well, maybe some of the Gnostics did have some historical foundation, what they were saying, or, what about the possibility maybe we could see some difference in approach between the synoptic gospels or something, and all that kind of stuff. We can talk about those things, but let's just make sure that both sides understand what's being discussed this evening. As a Christian, I want the Muslims to understand what you're asking me to do. You're asking me to believe that someone can come along over half a millennium after the founding of my faith, who had no contact with the original founders of my faith, did not speak the languages of the founders of my faith, and had no first-hand knowledge of the writings of my faith, and with only 40 words overthrow the centrality of the historical core of my faith. That's what you're asking of me. And I've always asked my Muslim friends, put yourself in my shoes. If someone comes along 600 years after Muhammad, not knowing Arabic, not knowing the Quran, living somewhere in France, and says that the Miraj and Isra never took place, that you should not be reading the Quran, it was not sent down from God, and I say this because I'm a prophet. Now, that's exactly the situation that you would be in, that you're asking us to put ourselves in, when you deny with only 40 Arabic words, and they are unclear. We don't know exactly what they mean and what they're saying. Could it just be saying that the Jews didn't do it, the Romans did? That is a possibility, grammatically speaking. And since there is no authentic hadith narration of interpretation of this text, who's to say? That's why there have been many interpretations down through history. And so this is the issue that we are facing this evening. Now, as a Christian, let me say to my Muslim friends, you need to understand something. Many of you will say, well, Christians are cross worshipers. Well, I imagine you've probably seen some people bowing down before crosses and things like that and doing things that they should not do in a lack of purity of worship. I get it. But you need to understand why the cross is so central. Not that we worship the cross. The cross itself is an instrument by which Jesus voluntarily gave his life. What you need to understand, I hear what the Quran is saying. If you look carefully at the Quran, look at the other places where crucifixion is mentioned. I think for the author of the Quran, Jesus could not have been crucified because the only people that are crucified are bad, evil opposers of God, and Allah would not allow one of his prophets to die in that way. I think that was the primary argument that was being made there. I get it. I hear it. What's the response to that? To understand what the author of the Quran never heard, and those were the words of Jesus in the Gospel of John. No one takes my life from me, I give it of my own accord. Jesus voluntarily gives his life. It is the purpose of the Father and the Son and the Spirit to glorify themselves in this specific manner. It's freely done out of his great condescension to us. You see, when we look at the cross, my friends, what we see, first of all, is the holiness of God. God's law demands that sin be punished. God cannot simply allow his law, which represents his own nature, to be broken and trampled upon. So that sin must be punished. And yet he desires to redeem a people, not because of anything in and of themselves, but because of his own goodness, kindness, mercy, and love. How's he going to do that? Well, he gave us sort of pictures of it in the Old Testament, but it only comes to fruition when Jesus Christ, according to John 1:14, the Word made flesh, entered into human flesh. He lived a perfect life. He was obedient to the Father in all things. And then he said, it's necessary that I go to Jerusalem. I must go. And he did. And what we see on the cross is God's power. The world sees weakness. The world sees Rome crushing a small man. We see the one who made the very wood of the tree upon which he has been nailed, controlling that power so as to bring about the greatest good that mankind has ever seen, the redemption of a people in and through his work. That's what we see when we see the cross, and that's why we boast in it. And that's why we're here this evening. You don't believe that. We want you to. You want us to stop believing that. That's what we're talking about this evening. No one's hiding anything. We're putting all our cards on the table, so to speak. That's the subject this evening. I thank you for being here.